Hello and welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video where we're going to take a look at the worst futures in the NBA, but there is a quick disclaimer I need to start this video off with. I'm recording this before the lottery, okay? Again, I'm going to say it very plain and simple, before the lottery. The lottery could completely shake this thing up, which is why I'm planning on recording a worst futures in the NBA post lottery as well. I think it'll be a fun way to kind of show what changes and how the league is going to be altered even before a draft pick is made, just based on where teams end up and where they land. But I do think this video is going to be a lot of fun. Now, hear me out. If I do include your team in this video, try to look at it not as negatively as you probably initially will. This is meant to be kind of more informative on teams that have the kind of toughest situations to wiggle out of, and just with where they currently sit in terms of assets and long-term outlook, in my opinion, which is, again, an opinion. It's okay if you disagree with me. Let me know in the comment section why, but let's keep it civil, okay? If you guys do enjoy this video and this type of content, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, turn on that notification bell, and let's jump into it here with a video preview. I have highlighted 4 NBA teams that have the worst futures in the league, in my opinion. And this is under the assumption that these teams would not move up into the top 4 to draft either Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller, and or Amen Thompson. Of course, those 4 players and a few others in this draft could really change the outlook and direction of franchises. And again, like I said in the open, I don't think that there's a definitive, oh, this team is dead in the water. There's a lot of possibilities right now that could open windows for teams, and it takes one smart trade or one underrated signing to completely shift the direction of your franchise and to kind of turn things on its head and fix the direction. So this is, again, by no means definitive or essentially putting a team in a jail cell. Okay, this is just my current observations with where assets currently sit, which I think is fun to look at, and it's just meant to kind of canvas the league and think about where teams are currently positioning. And a lot of the ways to look at it is based off of trade value, trade assets, and really the best possible way to look at it. In this video, I also excluded 4 teams. I excluded the Detroit Pistons, the Houston Rockets, San Antonio Spurs, and the Charlotte Hornets. Those 4 teams have the best odds at picking first overall, which is partially why I disincluded them. But also, these teams do have just generally very young cores that I think it's difficult to properly assess them at this point. Detroit, I like their long-term future just based on some of the players and the names they have on the roster. But again, it's so early in their careers. We haven't even really seen Cade Cunningham play with Jaden Ivey really at this point. You know, they played a couple games together. So it's tough to assess, say, where Detroit is. We haven't seen Ime Udoka as the coach of the Rockets quite yet. You know, the Spurs, they're still a piece or 2 away, so I didn't want to include them. And then the Charlotte Hornets, the whole Miles Bridges situation, LaMelo Ball missing so much time, new coach, just kind of shook everything up this past year, which is why they were as poor as they were. I think that those 4 teams are fair to exclude, but possibly post lottery, who knows? Maybe I throw a team like the Charlotte Hornets in there, which is why they're underlined, because I think they are, out of those 4 teams, in probably the roughest long-term shape, although having LaMelo Ball is already a very good starting point. So let's jump into it here. And the 4th worst future in the league is my Dallas Mavericks. And this is how you know I'm not really being partial in this video. There's going to be solid rationale, and this has nothing to do with any of my internal biases. For the most part, I feel like I set aside any biases I have. For the most part, I don't think any of you could really guess which players I really do and dislike around the league that much, which is, I think, a testament to me bringing out analysis that is fair and non-biased in the best of my abilities. And I've been keeping it completely honest with Dallas over the last year and a half or so. And, you know, I thought Dallas was going to be better this season than they were. They had a disappointing year. And trading for Kyrie Irving in the middle of it did not help. In fact, I think that tanked their season. And it's not because Kyrie was the problem. There was just a lot of issues with the way that this roster is constructed, with the way the roster is constructed, excuse me. And I think Nico Harrison, he's been so focused on making the big time trade that he hasn't thought about making the right trade or the small trade that needs to get them to where they need to go, or to add some of the pieces and the elements of actual team building that they're missing. And because of that, they land themselves on this list for me very clearly, because as of right now, assuming they keep their own first round pick, which would be number 10 overall, again, my assumption is this team does not move up into the top 4. It's about a 14% chance for them to do so. The reason why it really hurts here for Dallas is they only have their 2023 and 2025 firsts available for trade, or excuse me, 2023 and 2027 first available for trade. They cannot trade 25. They cannot trade 29. They also have 0 second round picks to trade. You look at this current roster, the way that it's constructed, there's not a lot of big positive contracts that people would really value around the league, and there's not players you can move off of for either draft compensation or kind of reshuffling of the cards, and they're not in a position to land any big time players. I know Kyrie Irving's supposed to be that big time player, but the Mavericks are still at a spot where there's currently huge flaws. And to be honest, I would have strongly considered Dallas for the number 1 spot on this list as the worst future in the NBA if it wasn't for number 77, because in my opinion, he still is a top 5 player in the world, and he's only 24 years old. So you might be saying, how do they have one of the worst futures in the league if they have a 24-year-old megastar? And the reason why is because I think they're really playing with fire, and at some point they might have to trade him because he might demand out. He's got a player option at the end of his supermax that he signed with the franchise following his rookie deal. And the issue with that is when it gets to 2 years away from free agency, he has a ton of leverage. And based on NBA history, we've seen a lot of stars ask out about 2 years out from a contract because it usually gives them a good amount of leverage to put some pressure on the franchise to actually trade them. And you might say, well, they're going to get so much for Luka Doncic. I think the biggest thing, the hardest part of the NBA is to get the guy, the number 1 player, the guy that you feel like can actually win you a championship. We've seen a lot of really, really good teams lose in the first, second round of the playoffs, even the conference finals on occasion, because they don't have that true number 1 go-to franchise caliber player. And the Mavericks have that, but I really think that they're at jeopardy of losing him. Now, they're going to get a kit and caboodle for him. They're going to be, I think, better positioned in terms of those assets. But you think about those assets, they're going to spend day and night trying to find a new Luka Doncic to ultimately fill in and be the guy. And they're going to have that challenge while still owing draft picks out the board, or out the door, excuse me, specifically that 2029 first to Brooklyn. They're going to be strapped for assets. It's going to be really hard for them to make moves on draft nights if Luka Doncic were to potentially ask out. They're kind of at a holding pattern right now, and they've got very little ways to improve. And I think this team's going to be backed into a corner as of right now. Is there a way out that I'm maybe not seeing? Possibly, but you guys know in my offseason previews, I've really covered these teams very extensively. I understand where they're at cap-wise. I understand the free agents that are out there with videos that I've made. I understand their cap space situation. I know the contracts they have on the books, and it's just, for me, it's very difficult to see Dallas operating wisely out of this. The only hope for them really is that Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving are just talented enough that they win. But again, there's a big hiccup there as well, that Kyrie Irving could potentially just leave them in free agency if he were to choose to do so. Now, I don't think he will, but that's something that you could also bake into this argument about why they have a bottom 4 future in the league. But really, the big selling point to me is the fact that I think Luka Doncic likely does not finish his contract with the Dallas Mavericks, which is my biggest concern, not only as an NBA fan for them, but as a Mavericks fan myself, and honestly, the direction of the franchise because of this worry. Third, we go on to the Portland Trailblazers. And Blazers fans, you guys know I was very, very harsh on this franchise during my offseason preview on them. Not in a way that I thought this team's completely doomed, but I just think that they've got a really difficult decision on their hands. And again, this is the assumption that they don't move up into the top 4. Moving up into the top 4 could completely reshape how this team looks right now. They're projected to have the 5th overall pick, but very easily a team could jump them as well in the lottery. And if that were to happen, they get bumped down to maybe 6th or 7th, and you're getting slightly diminished results. Now, this is a very good draft class, a good draft class to have a top 7 pick in, but there's also a superstar player here putting pressure on the organization to try and win with him, and not wanting to have another young player on the roster and instead wanting to push for it. And it kind of creates this polarity within the organization and within the fan base that, half of the fans want to go and try and win a title with Damian Lillard, which is a completely reasonable idea because Dame is one of those guys that I alluded to earlier as a potential franchise guy that could lead your team to a championship. But on the flip side of that, you've got all these other pieces. Jeremy Grant, who I think is going to get massively overpaid. Yusuf Nurkic, who got overpaid this past offseason. They've got guys right now that I just think, are they good enough? And my answer to that is probably not. So if you try and push for it right now, maybe you trade Simons, you trade the pick that you have this year in a win now move. Are you just in a spot where you're kind of stuck and you're not going to be as good as you once thought or as good as you think you could be? And that's a real risk here for Portland if they make a buy now move. And then on the flip side, again, they face some of the same issues that Dallas potentially faces of having to trade a Damian Lillard. But the only issue I have with that is if you trade Dame, you're not getting the same type of package you are for Luka Doncic, which is why I think Portland's in a really tricky spot right now, where if they do move up, it could completely change the entire outlook of the franchise, specifically to number one. Victor Wembanyama solves all of the issues we've talked about here for Portland. But with where they currently sit right now, I just feel uneasy about this team and the direction because there's two really contrasting options for them. It's either win with Dame, trade the pick, or trade Dame, try and build around the pick long term. And then the question about trying to build around the pick long term, who are you going to get that's going to fill the void of Damian Lillard, even if you make a great trade and get 3 first-round picks for him and maybe some extra stuff in there, maybe a good young player. I want to know who those players are and who those picks become, because that's really what we're talking about. Obviously, everyone loves to have the draft picks, but you have to nail the picks. And I think Portland will if they make a move like that. But again, if you nail every single pick, it doesn't mean you're getting another Damian Lillard. He's a top 10 player in the NBA, a lot of people would agree with. So it's just, for me, it just feels like a tricky situation for them. I hope my point is coming through here on why their future is, I think, kind of muddy. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that there's any teams that I'm like, oh my gosh, they're absolutely stuck and dead in the water. But I just think Portland's got some really, really tough decisions to make here. And 6 months from now, I might, if they make the wrong decision, and in my opinion, trading the pick this year would be the wrong decision, I just don't think they have enough to win, especially if they commit to Jeremy Grant, which is my biggest concern for this team. So this maybe is a TBD. We'll come back to this later. And if Jeremy Grant's playing on a 5-year, $180 million contract, yeah, you're going to see me not buy into this team. That's just the reality with how I feel about this current situation and circumstance for Portland. Moving into the team with the second worst future, in my opinion. And Wizards fans, you guys are not surprised. I'm thinking of you, Aquino Age. I'm thinking of you, Big J. You are not surprised to see your team on the list here. And the reason as to why we talked about this a lot in the offseason preview, but I wanted to kind of give a clear ranking on where I thought the Wizards currently sat across the league. And I think that their situation is terrible. I really do. Kuzma and Porzingis, both free agents this offseason. Potentially could lose both of them for nothing. But the other side, the flip side of that, is committing to them. And to be honest, that might be just as bad as losing them for nothing, because this trio right here, Bradley Beal, Kristaps Porzingis, Kyle Kuzma, was enough to get you 12th in the Eastern Conference this year. I know you could argue, well, Beal was out, missed some time. That's kind of been Beal the last few years. And Kristaps, can you rely on the health? He played 65 games. He played a phenomenal 65 games this year. I'm one of the biggest Kristaps Porzingis fans on the planet. Again, are you going to rely on the health? And are you going to commit to these two guys? And then essentially these three players here that you see on your screen right now are making up 80 to 90 to 100% of your actual cap space. And you're going maybe into the luxury tax to actually add talent to this team. That seems like a really hard sell for me. And just currently with where they sit in the draft order, it's not like they have a great likelihood of moving up. Again, moving up to number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 could completely alter the direction of this franchise in a real positive way, in a way that they need it. Scoot Henderson would do wonders for this team. The potential in Amen Thompson could really shift the perception around this team. Brandon Miller would be a fantastic addition, and obviously Victor Wembanyama would become the best player in franchise history rather quickly into his young career, in my opinion, because he's that good. I think that there's a pathway here for Washington to get out of this. and it's through lottery luck. And just because of that, the way that I see them getting out of it, it just doesn't feel good to me. And if you want to know another reason why I'm just really low on this, Bradley Beal's contract is going to be within a year or two viewed as one of the worst, if not the worst contract in the NBA, because it's just, there's so much money attached to him. Plus he's got a no trade clause, plus a trade kicker. There's a lot of things baked into that contract that are just really problematic from Washington's team building perspective. And out of all of the open jobs this offseason, when it comes to NBA jobs, coaching, GM vacancies, that kind of thing, I think Washington's is a very interesting one, because the job title itself of being, potentially president of basketball operations, GM of a team, is very alluring. But if you really look at the team and say, uh-oh, I've got a lot of work to do, and stepping in and day one of your new job, you have to decide whether or not to give Kristaps Porzingis $140 million and Kyle Kuzma $140 million with the franchise that just finished 12th in the Eastern Conference. That feels like a really tough ask for me to commit to those guys on those price points, especially when you're already going to be paying Bradley Beal $40 to $50+ million every single season on top of those two guys. It's just really, really tough. I do like some of the players on this team. Again, this video is going to sound really negative. It's just kind of more of a canvas of where these teams are at. I just want to make sure I'm emphasizing that enough clearly, because there's going to be comments down below. You guys will see them saying, oh my gosh, this, that, the other thing. Try and give them this time card in the video, because it's just, I'm not trying to be a complete hater here. It's just the way I honestly see things, which leads us to our worst future in the NBA. And in my eyes, it's the Chicago Bulls. And this follows after Arturas Karnisovas had a very aggressive and very poignant attack once becoming the lead decision maker there in Chicago. And it was met with a lot of trades. It was met with a lot of big contracts and a lot of tough decisions that he quickly landed on. One of them was trading for Nick Vucevic. Because of that, they owe their pick this year to the Orlando Magic. So out of all of these teams, they're kind of in one of the worst positions, because they don't even have their draft pick this year unless it moves up into the top 4. And again, my premise on this video is I'm assuming that these 4 teams do not jump up in the lottery into the top 4. So because of that, Chicago's not really adding any premium young talent in the first round in this year's draft, at least with the way things currently sit. You also think about the current age of their roster. They're one of the only teams to be top 10 in age in terms of older players and still miss the playoffs. That's a really, really rough look for a franchise. And, DeMar DeRozan's not getting any younger. DeRozan's a fantastic player. I think that they should look into trading him if they can find value for him, just because I think that even though it hurts to trade a really good player, with them, if they're going to consistently miss the playoffs or maybe at best be an 8th seed and just be mediocre, it's really one of the worst spots you can be in the NBA. We've seen that time and again. Zach LaVine is on a massive contract, very similar to Bradley Beal's contract. And again, I'm going to keep the same type of energy. LaVine's contract is a big negative in my eyes, and I can't buy into it. For a guy who he struggled defensively, now he's got a lot of offensive talent. This is just a really tough situation too, because I feel really bad for Chicago and Bulls fans in general for a few different reasons. First of all, the team was really, really good a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, before Alex Caruso and Lonzo Ball went down with injuries. And that leads me into my second point. Lonzo Ball is really the missing link on this team. This team is really badly in need of floor spacing and a connector who can also be an all-world defender. And there's not very many of those guys out there, and they had one of them in Lonzo Ball. They had that guy, a fantastic three-point shooter, one of the quicker processors in the league. Ball doesn't have to stick in his hands, and he's got the size to defend across multiple positions. We saw how good they were with Lonzo on their team, playing every game and being a high-impact guy. And for me, just with the injury news on him, how the last really 16 to 18 months have gone for him in terms of the injury rehab and missing the entire season, and really doesn't sound like the hopes coming into next year are very high either for what he's going to be able to provide with his running and everything that's gone wrong with him so far through his rehab. It's a very sad situation. I'm hoping for the best for Lonzo Ball. but he's dealing with a very rare injury right now that not a lot of NBA players have sustained and then ever came back from. There's only a few examples in NBA history. So because of that, the guy who I think is really the big time hinge player for the franchise being very good or not good at all, with his injury prognosis right now not looking very good, it's a big problem to me. Not to mention Nick Vucevic is heading toward free agency. There's a world out there that Chicago lets him go, and then they're definitely not going to get better by that move, but also committing to him long term. I could see that playing out in a very similar way to how I talked about Yusuf Nurkic in this video, how the Blazers committed to him and they committed too much money, and now all of a sudden it's a big net negative contract in my eyes. I think a year or two from now, if Vucevic does stay in Chicago, on the wrong price point, we could be talking about that contract in a very similar light, just because of some of the limitations that he has. He's a very good offensive player, played all 82 games this year, so his availability was awesome for them. But just realistically, if the goal is trying to win championships and win playoff series, which the Bulls have not done yet with this team, you need to find ways to defend the basket. You need to find ways to build around defensive-minded bigs in my eyes. And honestly, I just don't think that Nikola Vucevic is one of those guys. So just a quick reminder, again, I'm trying to be very clear in this video. This is pre-lottery, okay? The lottery changes everything. If one of these 4 teams moves up into the top 4, it completely shakes up how I view these teams. Remember, we're going to record this video, this exact same style video, after the NBA draft lottery as well, which will be a completely different video. It'll just be so different because the NBA draft lottery is going to throw a wrench in here that I'm not seeing, not projecting, and I just can't assume something will happen. But once it does happen, it changes the landscape of the NBA. The NBA draft lottery night, in my opinion, is probably the most important singular night in NBA history since Game 7 of the 2016 finals between the Warriors and Cavs. I think it is that big of a night. I think it has that type of magnitude to it, just, given the landscape of the league and how it's going to change with Victor Wembanyama landing with the team, but also all of these other teams that if somehow, some way the lottery gods bless them and they move up into the top 4, it's going to completely change their franchise. And remember, creativity can back a team out of a corner. This is by no means a Left 4 Dead video where teams are just screwed. If they showed up on this list, they're dead in the water, screwed. I'm not saying that. I think that they just have tougher pathways to moving back to a good spot that they want to be in. For the Mavericks, again, that was potentially losing Luka Doncic. For the Bulls, it's just getting out of mediocrity. And what do you do with Vucevic this offseason and DeRozan's aging, Levine's on a negative contract, Lonzo's been injured. For the Wizards, it's what do you do with Porzingis and Kuzma while having Beal on the roster. It feels like you should keep those guys, but can you really afford to do that when it comes to actual roster construction and team building? That's going to be a tough question. I mean, there's just a lot of concerns I have out here. Portland, again, the big question is what do you do with Dame or what do you do with the pick? Because I like the idea of one pathway, and I don't like the idea of another, which is why I included them in here, because I think they're going to take the pathway that I do not like, honestly. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Again, just try to have a little bit of fun with it as well. Thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun recording this one. Again, this is not meant to be a Left 4 Dead video. Just keep that in mind. Comment that to some of the people in the comment section that are leaving some hate comments right about now, because I'm sure I made some people upset. I totally understand. I'm not trying to bash these teams, but I understand how it could look that way. Thanks again so much for watching. If you did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content just like you saw here, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.